The crown hit the flames with a sound like breaking bones. Every wolf in the great hall froze. Nobles, guards, servants, all staring at the 5-year-old pup who just committed treason against his own father. Prince Cassian stood trembling before the ceremonial fire, his small chest heaving, tears streaming down his face as he pointed one shaking finger at the woman in silver standing on the dais. "Not her," the child sobbed. "I want Mama Ilara. Bring back Mama Ilara." The Alpha King Theron's face went white, then red with fury. Beside him Lady Seraphina, the chosen bride, the perfect match according to pack law, the alliance that would secure the northern territories, stood frozen in her coronation gown, the empty crown case still in her hands. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. But then again, nothing about Ilara had ever followed the script. "Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because you're about to feel everything I felt when this moment shattered my world." 3 months earlier, Ilara had been part of this pack. Not officially. Never officially. Omegas born outside the bloodline weren't recorded in the pack registry, weren't given family names, weren't acknowledged in any ceremony or decree. They existed in the margins. Servants, caregivers, the invisible hands that kept the great houses running. Ilara had raised Prince Cassian from infancy. When the queen had died giving birth, hemorrhaging on silk sheets while healers scrambled and failed, it was Ilara who'd taken the screaming newborn and somehow, impossibly, gotten him to sleep. It was Ilara who'd walked the palace corridors at midnight, singing old songs in a language most wolves had forgotten. It was Ilara who'd taught him his first words, tended his first fever, kissed his scraped knees and told him stories about brave wolves who protected the weak. King Theron had barely noticed her. To him she was furniture. Useful furniture certainly. The pup clearly thrived under her care, but nothing more. He had a kingdom to run, alliances to forge, a legacy to protect. The queen's death had been a political disaster as much as a personal tragedy. The Southern Pack had expected her to cement their alliance with an heir they could claim shared blood. Instead, she'd left him with a squalling infant and a hole in his treaty negotiations. For 5 years, Theron had buried himself in statecraft while Ilara raised his son. She'd never asked for recognition, never pushed boundaries. She'd simply loved the boy because he needed loving, because he was small and motherless, and she had more tenderness in her than she knew what to do with. Until Theron decided to remarry. Lady Seraphina of the Northern Territories was everything a king's bride should be. Powerful bloodline, extensive connections, trained in diplomacy and pack politics since childhood. The match was strategic perfection. The Northern Pack controlled the mountain passes and the silver mines. An alliance through marriage would make Theron's kingdom the strongest in living memory. The royal decree went out on a Tuesday. The wedding would take place in 3 months, followed immediately by Seraphina's coronation as queen. A new era was beginning. Ilara heard about it from the other servants. No one thought to tell her directly. Why would they? She wasn't family. She wasn't anyone. But Cassian knew. Even at 5 he understood what it meant. He'd found Ilara in the nursery that evening, folding his clothes with hands that shook just slightly. "Papa's getting married," he'd said, climbing into her lap like he always did, fitting himself against her like a puzzle piece finding its place. "Does that mean I'll have a new mama?" Ilara had held him tight, breathing in the puppy-sweet scent of his hair. "It means your papa won't be lonely anymore, little wolf." "That's good, isn't it? But I'll still have you." She'd hesitated, just a fraction of a second. But children sense everything, and Cassian had gone rigid in her arms. "Ilara, I'll still have you. Always," she'd whispered, and hated herself for the lie even as she spoke it. Because she'd seen the way Lady Seraphina looked at her during the introductory visit, the way nobles always looked at Omegas who'd gotten too comfortable, too visible, too close to power. Seraphina wouldn't want reminders of the previous queen. She certainly wouldn't want an unregistered Omega playing mother to the heir. Ilara's dismissal came 2 weeks before the wedding. The head of household delivered the news himself, clearly uncomfortable. Lady Seraphina believes it would be best if the young prince begins adjusting to new routines before her arrival. You're to be reassigned to the southern estate. Effective immediately. The southern estate. Ilara's voice sounded distant even to her own ears. That's 300 miles away. Yes. Generous severance, of course. And excellent references should you wish to seek employment elsewhere in the future. Should you wish. As if she had wishes that mattered. As if she had any power at all. She'd had one day to pack. One day to figure out how to explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes people leave, even when they promise they won't. Even when they don't want to. Cashin had cried. Of course he'd cried. He'd clung to her skirts and begged and bargained with a desperation only children can manage. I'll be good, I'll be so good, please don't go, I need you, please, please, please. Ilara had knelt before him, taking his small face in her hands. Listen to me, little wolf. You are the bravest, kindest boy I've ever known. You're gonna do amazing things. Your papa loves you so much. And Lady Seraphina, she's going to take such good care of you. But I want you. I know, sweetheart. You know. And I will always, always love you. Nothing will ever change that. Not distance, not time, not anything. You'll always be my little wolf. Do you understand? He hadn't understood. How could he? He was 5 and his whole world was crumbling and the only mother he'd ever known was leaving. She'd held him until he cried himself into hiccuping silence, then kissed his forehead one last time and walked away before she could break down completely. She didn't look back. Looking back would have destroyed her. The servants had given her sympathetic looks as she left. Some had hugged her. Most had simply watched, relieved it wasn't them, grateful to still have their positions. That was how the world worked for people like them. You didn't fight. You didn't argue. You accepted what you were given and tried to survive. Ilara had made it to the southern estate, taken the small cottage they'd assigned her, and spent 3 days crying until she had no tears left. Then she'd started rebuilding. Found work in the village. Made friends with the local healer. Started teaching reading lessons to the Omega children who'd never been given formal education. She tried not to think about Cashin. Tried not to wonder if he was eating properly, if he was having nightmares, if anyone sang to him at bedtime. Tried not to imagine him calling for her and finding her gone. He'd tried. He'd failed. But she'd survived. Until the night of the coronation. King Theron had done everything right. The wedding had been magnificent. 3 days of feasting, diplomatic delegations from every major pack, ceremonies that honored tradition while projecting strength. Seraphina had played her part perfectly, gracious and regal, every word and gesture calculated to reinforce the alliance. The nobility approved. The treaties were signed. The northern pack opened the silver mines. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Except for Cashin. The boy had been quiet during the wedding. Dutiful. He'd stood in his formal clothes and smiled when required and said his prepared lines to his new stepmother. But anyone paying attention could see the deadness in his eyes. The way he flinched when Seraphina tried to touch his hair. The way he asked every night when Ilara was coming back. She's not coming back, Seraphina had told him, not unkindly but firmly. You're a prince, Cashin. You need to understand that servants come and go. You'll have new tutors, new attendants. Better ones. She wasn't a servant, Cashin had whispered. She was my mama. Your mother is dead. I'm your mother now. The boy had gone silent after that. Stopped asking. Stopped speaking much at all. Theron had noticed, of course. He wasn't heartless. But he'd assumed time would heal it. Children were resilient. Cashin would adjust. He had to adjust. He was the heir, and heirs didn't get to indulge emotional attachments that complicated pack politics. The coronation was meant to be the final piece. Seraphina would be crowned queen in a ceremony that predated written history, the crown forged from silver mined in the northern territories, blessed with the blood of the previous monarchs, placed upon her head by the Alpha King himself while the pack bore witness. Cashin's role was simple. As heir, he would present the crown to his father. Santal. Show the pack that the royal family was united, strong, and ready to lead them into prosperity. The great hall had been transformed. Thousands of candles. Banners representing every allied pack. The ceremonial fire burning in its ancient brazier. Flames fed by wood from the world tree itself. Nobles in their finest clothes. Guards in polished armor. The priest of the old ways is ready to speak the binding words. Seraphina had looked beautiful in silver and white. Her hair adorned with northern crystals. Her bearing absolutely regal. This was her moment. Her triumph. The culmination of decades of training and careful political maneuvering. Theron had taken the crown from the blessed case. Turned to Cashin. Nodded for the boy to come forward. Cashin had walked to the dais like a prisoner approaching execution. His small face was pale, composed. Too composed for a child. He'd taken the crown from his father's hands. And then something had broken inside him. Maybe it was seeing Seraphina standing where his real mother should have been. Maybe it was the weight of the crown, physical proof that this was permanent, that nothing was going to change, that Ilara really wasn't coming back. Maybe it was simply that 5-year-olds shouldn't have to perform political theater when their hearts are breaking. Whatever the reason, Cashin had turned, walked to the ceremonial fire, and thrown the crown into the flames. The sound of metal hitting burning wood had echoed through the shocked silence of the great hall. Then Cashin had screamed, not in fear, not in anger, but in pure, desperate grief. I don't want her. I want Mama Ilara. Bring her back. Please. Please bring her back. He'd fallen to his knees, sobbing so hard he could barely breathe. Papa, please. Send her away. Send her away and bring Mama back. I'll be good, I promise, I'll be so good, just please. Every wolf in the hall was staring. Not at the crown melting in the sacred fire. Not at Seraphina's mortified face. Not at Theron's mounting rage. They were staring at the small boy destroying himself with grief, and every parent among them felt their heart crack. Theron had moved forward. His face a thunderstorm. Cashin! No! The boy scrambled backward, away from his father, away from Seraphina, toward the doors. I won't stay. I want Mama. I want to go home. This is your home. Not without her. It's not home without Mama Ilara. Cashin's voice broke on a sob. Please, Papa. Please. I'll give up being prince. I'll give up everything. Just let me go find her. Please. I can't do this without her. I can't. He'd collapsed then, hyperventilating, crying so hard he was making himself sick. The nursemaid had rushed forward, but Cashin had fought her with surprising strength, still crying for Ilara, begging for someone, anyone to take him home. To take him to his real home. To his real mother. In the chaos that followed, nobody noticed the old wolf standing at the back of the hall. Nobody except the priest, who'd gone very still. His ancient eyes fixed on the ceremonial fire where the crown was melting. The crown that had been forged from sacred silver, blessed with royal blood, imbued with pack magic older than memory. The crown that was now being consumed by flames fed by the world tree itself. The priest knew the old laws. The forgotten laws. The ones written before pack politics, before bloodlines and registries and all the systems wolves had built to organize power. Fire was truth. Fire was a choice. Fire rejected what was false. The crown had been meant for Seraphina. The flames had accepted it. But not for the reason anyone thought. Ilara was teaching reading lessons when the messenger arrived. She'd started holding classes in her cottage. A dozen Omega children from the village, ages 5 to 10, crowded around her small table, sounding out words with determined concentration. The knock at the door had startled them all. Messengers didn't come to cottages like hers. Messengers delivered to pack houses, noble estates, and people who mattered. She'd opened the door to find a royal guard. Not just any guard, but Captain Aldrich himself, the head of the king's personal security, standing on her doorstep looking deeply uncomfortable. Miss Ilara, he'd said formally. You're requested at the palace. Immediately. Her heart had stopped. Cashin. Is he hurt? Is he? The prince is unwell. Not physically, Aldrich had added quickly. But he's asking for you. Demanding, actually. He's been inconsolable since the coronation ceremony, and he'd glanced at the children staring wide-eyed from inside the cottage. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Ilara had turned to the oldest child, a 9-year-old Omega girl named Mira. Can you take everyone home? We'll continue lessons tomorrow. Is the prince really asking for you? Mira had whispered, eyes huge. I don't know, sweetheart. But I need to go find out. The ride to the palace had taken 6 hours. 6 hours for Aldrich to explain what had happened at the coronation. 6 hours to process that Cashin had committed treason for her. 6 hours of Ilara's heart simultaneously soaring and shattering. He'd thrown the crown into the fire. For her. He'd rejected the queen. For her. He'd been willing to give up everything. For her. The king is furious, Aldrich had said quietly. Lady Seraphina is talking about returning to the northern territories. The political situation is delicate. Then why bring me back? Won't that make it worse? The boy hasn't eaten in 3 days. He's making himself sick. The healers are worried. Aldrich had met her eyes. You're not being summoned as a guest, Miss Ilara. You're being summoned because the heir to the throne is destroying himself, and you're the only one who can stop it. The implication was clear. Fix this or face consequences. Make the boy accept his situation. Make him eat. Make him behave. Then disappear again, properly this time. Ilara had nodded, her throat too tight for words. They'd arrived at the palace after dark. Aldrich had led her through the servants' entrance. Of course, the servants' entrance. She wasn't allowed in the front, wasn't allowed to be visible. Up back staircases to the royal wing. To Cashin's rooms. The nursemaid stationed outside looked exhausted. Thank the moon you're here. He won't sleep. Won't eat. Just cries and asks for you. Ilara's hands were shaking as she opened the door. The room was dark except for a single candle. Cashin was huddled in his bed, wrapped in blankets. His small body shaking with silent sobs. He looked so small. So broken. Little wolf, she'd whispered. His head had snapped up. For a moment he'd simply stared at her, like she was a dream he was afraid to believe in. Then he'd screamed, a sound of pure joy, and launched himself across the room into her arms. Mama. Mama, you came back. I knew you would. I knew if I was brave enough, if I showed Papa how much I needed you. Ilara had caught him, sinking to her knees, holding him as tight as she dared. He was too thin. She could feel his ribs. How much weight had he lost in 3 months? I'm here, she'd murmured into his hair. I'm here, sweetheart. I've got you. Don't leave again. Please. I'll be so good. I'll do anything. Just don't leave. Shoo. We'll figure it out. I promise. She'd carried him back to bed, climbed in beside him like she used to when he was smaller, and held him while he cried out 3 months of grief and fear and loneliness. She sang the old songs, stroked his hair, told him he was brave and strong and so loved. Gradually, his breathing had evened out. The sobs had faded. He'd drifted into sleep, still clutching her hand, his face pressed against her shoulder. Ilara had held him and tried not to think about what happened next. Tried not to imagine the impossible situation she was in. Tried not to feel the weight of the pack law and political reality crushing down on them both. She was still holding him when King Theron walked in 2 hours later. Theron had aged in 3 months. New lines around his eyes. More gray in his dark hair. The weight of kingship had always sat heavily on him, but now it looked like it might break him. He'd stopped in the doorway, staring at Ilara and Cashin. His son, finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. The Omega woman who'd somehow become the most important person in the boy's world. He threw the crown into the fire, Theron had said quietly. Do you understand what that means? I'm sorry, Ilara had whispered. Your Majesty, I never asked for. I know you didn't. He'd stepped into the room, moving carefully so as not to wake Cashin. You never asked for anything. That's part of the problem. Ilara had tensed, unsure what he meant. Theron had crossed to the window, staring out at the darkened grounds. When my wife died, I was lost. I had a kingdom to run and an infant I didn't know how to care for. You appeared, they told me you were good with children, that you'd raised your siblings after your parents died, and you just took over. Made it look easy. Cashin thrived. I was grateful. I thought that was enough. He'd turned to face her. I never saw you. Not really. You were efficient, quiet, and good at your job. I didn't realize you were raising my son. Loving him. Becoming his mother in every way that mattered except blood and law. Your Majesty. Let me finish. His voice was strained. I chose Seraphina because she made political sense. Good alliance. Strong bloodline. Everything a king's wife should be. I thought Cashin would adjust. Children do, don't they? They're resilient. He is resilient, Ilara had said softly. But he's also 5 years old and he's lost everyone he's ever loved. His mother died. Then I was taken away. Can you blame him for fighting to keep the only parent he has left? The only parent. Theron had gone very still. You think you're his parent. I know I'm not. Not legally. Not by blood. I'm just the Omega who raised him, fed him, comforted him, taught him, loved him unconditionally. Theron's jaw had clenched. While I was being king, you were being his mother. And I didn't even notice until he was willing to destroy his future to keep you. The silence had stretched between them, heavy with implications neither knew how to address. Finally, Theron had spoken again. The priest told me something tonight. About the crown. About the fire. Your Majesty. There are old laws. Older than the pack system, older than bloodline politics. The crown rejected Seraphina. That's what the priest says. The sacred fire accepted it, consumed it, which means the match wasn't blessed. Wasn't right. Ilara had felt ice flood her veins. I don't understand. Neither do I, entirely. But the priest was very clear. The crown burning means the proposed queen isn't the one the pack needs. Isn't the one the moon chose. Theron had laughed, a bitter sound. Do you know what happens when a coronation is rejected by the old magic? When sacred items are destroyed by holy fire? She'd shaken her head. Neither does anyone else. It hasn't happened in 500 years. The last time it started a civil war. He'd run a hand through his hair. Seraphina left this evening. She says she won't be humiliated by superstitious nonsense. But we both know what it means. The Northern Alliance is broken. The treaty is void. Everything I've worked for. I'm sorry, Ilara had whispered. I'll go. I'll disappear. I'll make it clear to Cashin that you'll do nothing of the sort. Theron's voice had turned sharp. My son threw a sacred crown into holy fire and begged for you with everything he had. That kind of love, that kind of desperate, absolute need, that doesn't come from nowhere. He knows what I didn't. That you're his real mother. The one who matters. Ilara's eyes had filled with tears. But the pack will adapt. They always do. Theron had crossed to stand beside the bed, looking down at his sleeping son. I've been a fool. I prioritized politics over what my child needed. I chose alliance over family. I sent away the only mother Cashin has ever known because I was too blind to see what you meant to him. He'd met Ilara's eyes. I can't undo the past 3 months. I can't give back what we took from him. But I can choose differently now. Your Majesty, I don't understand what you're. Marry me. The words had hung in the air like thrown stones. Ilara had stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? I'm not asking because I love you. I don't know you well enough for that. Theron had been brutally honest. I'm asking because my son loves you. Because you've proven yourself to be exactly what this family needs. Because the crown rejected my political choice and maybe, just maybe, the old magic knows better than I do. You can't marry me. Omega. I'm not registered. I have no bloodline, no connections, no. You have what matters, my son's heart. His trust. His love. Theron had knelt beside the bed, putting himself at her level. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to be what you've always been. Cashin's mother. Officially. Legally. Permanently. I'm asking you to accept a crown that should have been yours years ago. The pack will never accept. The pack has a 5-year-old prince who just committed treason to protect what he loves. They've seen what happens when we ignore that kind of bond. They'll accept it because the alternative is watching their future king destroy himself. Theron's voice had softened. I'm not offering you romance, Ilara. I'm offering you a partnership. Protection. The legal right to love the child you've been raising. And I'm asking you to help me be a better father to him. To teach me what you already know. Ilara had looked down at Cashin, still sleeping peacefully against her. Her little wolf. Her heart. If I say yes, she'd whispered. It's for him. Only for him. I know. And that's exactly why it's the right choice. The announcement had come 3 days later. A royal decree, short and shocking. By order of King Theron of the Silver Moon Pack, the coronation ceremony shall be held again in 1 month's time. The crown shall be reforged. The bride shall be Miss Ilara of no bloodline and no registered pack, who has served this house with honor and devotion, and who is beloved by the heir to the throne. Any wolf who questions this decision may present their concerns to the prince himself. The last line was genius. Nobody wanted to face a 5-year-old who'd already proven he'd destroy sacred relics for the woman he loved. The nobility had been outraged, of course. Omegas didn't marry kings. It violated every principle of pack hierarchy, bloodline politics, alliance strategy. Lady Seraphina's family had sent threatening letters. The Southern Pack had demanded explanations. 3 major houses had formally protested. Theron had responded to each with the same message. My son threw a crown into holy fire to keep his family intact. If you wish to argue that pack politics matter more than that kind of love, you're welcome to try. But you won't do it in my presence. The threats had faded. Not because the nobility was convinced, but because nobody wanted to be the wolf who argued against a child's desperate love for his mother. It made them look monstrous, heartless. And deep down, even the proudest nobles had to admit, the boy had a point. The month had passed in a blur. Ilara had moved back to the palace, into a guest suite, not the queen's chambers. That would come after the wedding. Cashin had been ecstatic. He'd followed her everywhere, talking constantly, showing her everything she'd missed, sleeping in her room more nights than not. Theron had been respectful, distant but not cold. He'd invited her to join him for dinner with Cashin, asked her opinion on the boy's education, treated her with careful courtesy. They were dancing around each other, 2 people forced into partnership, trying to find common ground. One evening, 2 weeks before the wedding, Theron had found her in the library. Cashin was asleep upstairs, exhausted from a day of running through the gardens with the children of visiting nobles. You're reading about pack history, Theron had observed, noting the stack of books. I need to know what I'm walking into. What people will expect from an Omega queen. She'd closed the book. It's not a comforting reading list. No. I imagine not. He'd sat across from her. You don't have to do this. I want you to know that. If you've changed your mind. I haven't. I gave my word to Cashin. But not to me. She'd met his eyes. You're part of the package, Your Majesty. Cashin needs both of us. A mother and a father. That's what we're giving him. That's all. What else is there? You said yourself this isn't about love. Theron had been quiet for a moment. I said I don't know you well enough to love you. I didn't say I couldn't learn. Ilara's breath had caught. I'm not asking for promises, he'd continued. But I want you to know, I see you now. I understand what you sacrificed to raise my son. What you're sacrificing now, agreeing to this. I won't take that for granted. I'm getting a crown out of it. That's hardly a sacrifice. You're getting a crown that will make you a target. A position that will expose you to criticism and danger every day. A marriage to a man you don't love. A life under scrutiny from wolves who believe you're unworthy. He'd leaned forward. Don't pretend you're not giving up your freedom, your peace, possibly your safety. You're doing it for Cashin. I know that. But I want you to know I'm grateful. And I'll do everything I can to make sure you never regret it. She'd stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time. Not the distant king who'd barely noticed her existence. But a father who'd been drowning in duty, who'd made terrible choices, who was trying desperately to do better. We'll figure it out, she'd said softly. For Cashin. For Cashin, he'd agreed. But something in his eyes had suggested he was starting to hope for more. The day of the second coronation ceremony arrived. The great hall had been prepared again. New banners, new flowers, the same sacred fire burning in its ancient brazier. The crown had been reforged. Same silver, blessed again, made pure in the flames that had rejected the first choice. The pack had gathered. Not as many nobles this time. Some had boycotted in protest, but more common wolves. Servants, tradespeople. The wolves who'd seen Elara with Cashin over the years, who'd watched her gentle kindness, who'd understood what the boy had been trying to save. Elara wore a simple gown. She'd refused anything elaborate. I'm not noble, she'd told the dressmakers. I'm just me. They'd created something beautiful anyway. Silver-gray silk that flowed like water, embroidered with patterns of moons and wolves. No jewels, no crystals, just clean lines and elegant simplicity. She'd looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. You're beautiful, Mama, Cashin had whispered, slipping his small hand into hers. Thank you, little wolf. You're not scared. Terrified, she'd admitted. Me too. But we'll be brave together, right? She'd squeezed his hand. Always. They'd walked to the great hall together. Cashin refused to let go of her hand, and nobody dared tell the prince to maintain proper ceremony. He'd already proven what happened when people tried to separate them. The priest of the old ways had been waiting. He'd smiled when he saw Elara, a strange, knowing smile that made her shiver. The moon knows her own, he'd murmured. Welcome, child. Theron had stood at the front of the hall in his formal robes. When Elara and Cashin approached, his expression had softened. Ready? No, Elara had whispered. But I'm here anyway. That's all any of us can do. The ceremony had been traditional, ancient words in the old language. The priest calling on the Moon Mother to witness and bless. Blood oaths spoken by both king and bride-to-be. The pack bearing witness, their howls rising in harmony as the vows were sealed. Then the moment arrived. The crown. Theron had taken it from the case. Turned to Cashin. The boy had stepped forward, his small face serious. He'd taken the crown in both hands, careful and reverent. And then he'd done something nobody expected. He'd carried it to Elara himself. This is for you, Mama, he'd said clearly, his voice carrying through the hall. Because you're the bravest wolf I know. Because you chose me even when it was hard. Because you're my real family. He'd lifted the crown, too heavy for his small hands, but he'd managed and held it up to her. Elara had knelt before him, tears streaming down her face. Little wolf. I love you, Mama. I love you too. So much. Cashin had turned to his father. Papa. Will you help? It's too heavy. Theron had moved forward, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Together, father and son, they'd placed the crown on Elara's head. The weight had settled. Physical and symbolic. Heavy with responsibility and love and terror and hope. The priest had raised his staff. Behold, Queen Elara of the Silver Moon Pack. Mother to the heir. Protector of the vulnerable. Chosen not by bloodline but by love. Let any who question this speak now or hold their peace forever. The silence had been absolute. Then from the back of the hall an old voice. The fire accepted. The moon witnessed. The old magic speaks clear. This is right. Murmurs of agreement. Not from everyone. Not even from most. But enough. Theron had helped Ilara stand. They'd faced the pack together. King and queen. An alliance nobody had predicted. A choice that defied every rule. This is my family, Theron had announced. His hand on Cashin's shoulder. His other reaching for Ilara's. By law and love. Any wolf who wishes to challenge this answers to me. The howls had risen again. Acceptance or acknowledgement or simply recognition that this was reality now. Cashin had grabbed both their hands. Can we go celebrate now? I'm hungry. The tension had broken. Laughter had rippled through the hall. The impossible moment had passed. A new era had begun. The first year was brutal. Ilara faced opposition at every turn. Nobles who refused to acknowledge her. Servants who didn't know how to treat a queen who'd been one of them. Visiting dignitaries who made their disdain clear. She'd been spat on twice. Received death threats. Had rumors spread about her that made her sick to hear. But she'd had three things keeping her strong. Cashin, who loved her fiercely and publicly, who corrected anyone who disrespected his mama, who insisted she sit beside him at every meal, every lesson, every moment he could manage it. Theron, who proved surprisingly protective. The first time a visiting noble made a cutting remark about Omega blood diluting the royal line, Theron had banned him from court for a year. Speak of my queen with respect or don't speak at all. And the common wolves, the servants, the villagers, the Omegas who'd never had anyone represent them before. They'd rallied around her in ways that shocked the nobility. When the death threats came, it was common guards who volunteered for extra shifts. When rumors spread, it was village women who shouted them down. When visiting dignitaries snubbed her, it was merchants who refused them service. You're one of us, they'd told her. And you're making things better. Don't you dare give up. So she hadn't. She'd learned to hold her head high wearing a crown that felt too heavy. She'd learned to speak in council meetings, to negotiate treaties, to stand her ground when nobles tried to intimidate her. She'd made mistakes. So many mistakes, but she'd learned from each one. And slowly, grudgingly, the pack had started to see her as Cashin did. Not as an Omega pretending to be queen, but as the woman who'd sacrifice everything for the wolves she loved. The change in Theron had been slower, more subtle. Started with small things. The way he'd seek her opinion before making decisions about Cashin. The way he'd started asking about her day over dinner. The way his hand would linger when he helped her with her cloak. 6 months after the coronation, he'd found her crying in the garden. A particularly vicious letter had arrived. Anonymous, but clearly from someone in the nobility, describing in detail all the ways an Omega queen was an abomination. They're right, she'd whispered when Theron sat beside her. I don't belong here. I don't know what I'm doing. Every day I'm terrified I'll make a mistake that hurts Cashin or damages the pack. Stop. Theron had taken her hands. Every ruler feels that terror. You feel it constantly. The difference is you care enough to be afraid. That makes you better than half the nobles who think they're entitled to power. But I'm not. You're exactly what this pack needs. A queen who remembers what it's like to be powerless. Who fights for the wolves everyone else forgets. Who loves my son more than politics or position. He'd met her eyes. You're exactly what I need. Something in his voice had made her breath catch. Theron, I know we agreed this was just partnership. Just for Cashin. But Ilara, He'd stopped, seeming to struggle with words. I'm falling in love with you. I don't expect you to feel the same. I know that's not what you signed up for. But I need you to know, you're not just Cashin's mother to me anymore. You're my queen, my partner. And if you ever decide you could feel even a fraction of what I feel. She'd kissed him. Sudden and desperate and terrifying. Because somewhere between the political alliance and the daily partnership, between watching him be gentle with Cashin and seeing him fight for her dignity, she'd fallen too. I was afraid to hope, she'd whispered against his lips. Afraid to want more than what we agreed to. Hope, he'd murmured back. Want everything. I'll give you everything I have. It hadn't been a fairy tale romance. They'd still argued. Still had moments of friction and misunderstanding. Still struggled to blend their different worlds. But they'd built something real. Something solid. A family forged not by bloodline or pack law, but by choice and commitment and love that grew deeper every day. 3 years after the coronation, Ilara stood in the nursery, now expanded to include a second crib, watching Cashin carefully hold his newborn sister. She's so small, 8-year-old Cashin whispered, awed. Was I this small? Smaller actually, Ilara said, settling beside him. You were premature. Barely 5 pounds. But you took care of me anyway. Of course I did. You were mine from the moment I held you. Cashin looked up at her with eyes that held wisdom beyond his years. I'm glad I threw the crown in the fire, Mama. I know it caused problems. But if I hadn't, you wouldn't be here. Our family wouldn't be whole. Ilara felt tears sting her eyes. You were so brave, little wolf. I was scared, he admitted. But you taught me that being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. You were worth being brave for. Theron appeared in the doorway, watching them with an expression of such profound love it made Ilara's heart ache. The council is asking when you'll return to meetings, my queen. Tell them she's busy, Cashin said firmly. Being a mama is more important than council meetings. Cashin, Ilara started. He's right though, Theron said, coming to sit with them. Not about the council. You'll have to face them eventually. But about priorities. This is what matters. Family. These moments. The baby stirred, making soft cooing sounds. Cashin stroked her tiny hand. What if people are mean to her like they were to Mama? What if they say she doesn't belong because her mother is Omega? Then she'll have you to protect her, Theron said quietly. And parents who'll teach her that belonging isn't about bloodline. It's about love and loyalty and character. Just like your mama taught us. She's lucky, Cashin declared. She gets to grow up knowing Mama from the start. She doesn't have to lose anyone. Ilara pulled him close. This boy who'd fought for her when no one else would. You didn't lose me, sweetheart. You found a way to keep me. That's different. I'd do it again, he said fiercely. Every time. Forever. I know you would. That's what makes you extraordinary. They sat together as evening fell. A family that shouldn't have existed by any law or tradition, but did anyway because an 5-year-old had decided love mattered more than crowns. 5 more years passed. The pack had changed in ways nobody had predicted. Ilara's reforms had been gradual but profound. Omega children now received mandatory education. Unregistered wolves could petition for pack membership. Servants had legal protections and fair wages. The council included representatives from common wolves, not just nobility. The nobles had fought every change. But Ilara had learned to fight back, with policy, with alliance building, with the support of wolves who'd been invisible for too long. And she'd had unexpected allies. Theron, who'd realized his Omega Queen saw problems he'd been blind to. Cashin, who'd grown into a passionate advocate for the powerless. Even some of the nobility had come around, recognizing that a stronger pack meant empowering all its members. Now, at 13, Cashin was everything Ilara had hoped. Brilliant and compassionate. Strong but gentle. A prince who spent his afternoons teaching reading to Omega children, and his evenings studying strategy and diplomacy. He'd never forgotten what Ilara had sacrificed for him. Never took for granted the family they'd built. One evening, studying in the library, he'd looked up from his books. Mama, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Becoming queen. You could have had a quieter life. Easier. Nobody threatening you or questioning you. Ilara had closed her own book, considering. Sometimes the threats are exhausting. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of my cottage. But regret. Never. This family is worth every difficulty. Even when nobles are horrible to you. Even then. Because I get to watch you grow into the kind of man who asks questions like that. Who cares about whether people regret their choices? She'd reached across to ruffle his hair. You're going to be an amazing king someday. Because you taught me, he'd said simply. Everything good in me you put there. I just loved you. You did the rest. Cashin had been quiet for a moment. I'm writing a treatise for my diplomatic studies. About the coronation. About what happened when I threw the crown in the fire. Oh! I'm arguing that pack law needs to change. That choosing leadership based on bloodline alone is foolish. The old magic knew what it was doing when it rejected Lady Seraphina. That the best rulers are the ones who've known powerlessness, because they understand what they're fighting for. He'd met her eyes. I'm arguing that you're the greatest queen our pack has ever had, and it's because you were Omega, not despite it. Ilara's vision had blurred with tears. Cashin. It's true, Mama. Look at what you've changed. Look at how many lives you've improved. Bloodline didn't do that. Love did. Courage did. Understanding what it means to be vulnerable did. He'd smiled. I threw that crown in the fire because I needed you. But it turns out the whole pack needed you too. They just didn't know it yet. That night, lying in bed beside Theron, Ilara had told him about the conversation. He's right, Theron had murmured, pulling her close. You are the greatest queen we've ever had. And I'm the luckiest man alive because a 5-year-old had better judgment than I did. You came around eventually. I was an idiot. I almost lost everything because I was too blind to see what mattered. He'd kissed her forehead. Thank the moon for our son's courage. And for sacred fires that reject the wrong choice, Ilara had added. That too. Though I suspect the fire knew what it was doing. Old magic has a way of seeing what we miss. They'd fallen asleep tangled together. A king and an Omega queen who'd built an impossible love from political necessity and a child's desperate act of rebellion. The day Cashin turned 18, the pack gathered for his official recognition as crown prince and heir apparent. It was tradition, a ceremony that confirmed the succession line, that allowed the heir to take on official duties, that marked the transition from childhood to leadership. The great hall had been prepared with all the traditional ceremony. Banners. Flowers. The sacred fire burning bright. Cashin stood before the pack in formal robes, tall and strong and steady. Beside him his parents. Theron, older now but still powerful, and Ilara, wearing her crown with the confidence she'd earned through 13 years of fighting for her place. The priest of the old ways, ancient now but still sharp, spoke the traditional words. Called on the Moon Mother. Asked Cashin to state his oath. I, Cashin, heir to the Silver Moon Pack, swear to serve these wolves with honor and courage, to protect the weak and challenge the unjust, to rule with wisdom and compassion, to remember that power is responsibility, not privilege, to lead as my mother taught me, with love as my foundation and justice as my goal. The pack howled approval. Cashin had been preparing for this role his entire life. Nobody doubted he'd be extraordinary. But then Cashin did something unexpected. He turned to face his parents. Before I accept the symbols of my position, I want to say something. About the day I became prince. About the choice that defined our family. The hall went quiet. 13 years ago, I threw a sacred crown into holy fire. I was 5 years old and desperate and terrified of losing the only mother I'd ever known. Committed treason. I disrupted a coronation. I broke alliance treaties and caused political chaos. He smiled slightly. And it was the best decision I've ever made. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Because that day taught me something crucial. That love matters more than law. That family is what you choose, not what bloodline dictates. That true strength means fighting for what's right even when it's terrifying. He looked at Ilara. My mother taught me that. Not through words but through who she is. An Omega woman who had no power and every reason to accept her lot, but who loved me enough to fight for a place in a world that didn't want her. Tears were streaming down Elara's face now. "So before I take my oath as crown prince, I want to make a different promise. Not to the pack, but to my mother." Cashin took Elara's hands. "I promise that when I'm king, I'll continue the work you started. I'll fight for every Omega, every servant, every wolf who's been told they don't matter. I'll make sure the kind of love you showed me, unconditional, self-sacrificing, transformative, becomes the foundation of how we lead. And I'll make sure that no child ever has to throw a crown into fire to keep their family together, because families like ours will be celebrated, not forbidden." The hall erupted, not in scandal or protest, but in thunderous approval. Because everyone present had watched Elara's journey, had seen the changes she'd made, had witnessed what happened when love became policy. Theron stepped forward, his voice carrying over the noise. 13 years ago, my son committed what looked like treason. Today, I want to officially pardon that act, not because it wasn't treasonous, but because it was necessary. Because sometimes breaking unjust laws is exactly what's required. Because that 5-year-old saw something I'd missed, that the woman raising him with devotion and tenderness and unwavering love deserved recognition, protection, and power. He turned to Elara, taking her hand. "You've made me a better king. You've made our son extraordinary. You've transformed this pack into something more just and compassionate than I ever imagined possible. And you did it all while facing opposition and threats and wolves who believed you didn't belong." He raised his voice. "Let the record show, Queen Elara is the greatest ruler this pack has known. Not despite her Omega blood, but because of it. Because she understands what most nobles never learn, that true strength means protecting those who can't protect themselves." The howls rose again, louder this time. Acceptance had become a celebration. Cashin completed his oath, received the symbols of his position, not a crown yet, that would come when he became king, but a ceremonial blade and cloak that marked him as official heir. Then he did one more thing. He took the blade, knelt before Elara, and offered it to her. "This represents my power as future king. I place it in your hands, Mama, because everything I'll become you made possible. Guide me, correct me, keep me honest, and know that every good thing I do as a leader, I'm doing because you taught me how to love first and rule second." Elara took the blade with shaking hands. "Stand up, little wolf. You don't kneel to me." "Yes, I do. Always." But he rose, grinning through his own tears. "You saved me when I was 5. Let me spend my life proving you made the right choice." "You already have, sweetheart. Every single day." The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. Music and feasting and wolves from every corner of the territory coming to honor the crown prince who'd defied tradition and the Omega queen who'd changed their world. 20 more years passed. Elara grew older, her hair silvering, her face lined with the years of fighting battles and winning wars. But her eyes remained fierce. Her spine remained straight. Her love remained absolute. Cashin had become king when Theron passed peacefully in his sleep at 70. The transition had been smooth. Everyone expected it, welcomed it. Cashin was everything they'd hoped. Strong but compassionate, strategic but kind, powerful but humble. He'd married for love. A warrior woman from the Eastern Pack who'd proven herself in combat and diplomacy. They had 3 children who Elara adored with the same fierce devotion she'd given Cashin. And Cashin had kept every promise. Omega rights were now enshrined in pack law. Unregistered wolves could claim full membership. The council included representatives from every level of pack society. Education was mandatory and free. Servants had legal protections. The pack had become something new, something better. Now, at 68, Elara sat in the garden where she'd once cried over hateful letters, watching her grandchildren play. Cashin sat beside her, 43 years old and every inch a king, but still her little wolf. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. "The coronation." "Which one?" she teased. "You know which one. The day I threw the crown in the fire." "Every day," she admitted. "How could I not? It changed everything. Were you angry that I made such a scene? I was terrified. For you. For what it meant politically. For the danger you'd put yourself in. She took his hand. But angry. Never. You were 5 years old and fighting with the only weapons you had. You were braver than any adult in that hall. I was desperate. There's a difference. Is there? Sometimes the bravest things we do come from desperation. From loving something so much we can't bear to lose it. Cashin was quiet for a moment, watching his children, 2 girls and a boy, chase each other through the flower beds. I want them to know the story. The real story. Not the sanitized version for history books. They will. You'll tell them. I want you to tell them. About what it was like being dismissed. Being powerless. Fighting for recognition in a world that didn't want you. He met her eyes. I want them to understand what you sacrificed. What you overcome. So they never take for granted the world we've built. They're good children, Cashin. They already understand kindness. Because of you. You taught me and I'm teaching them. That's how legacy works. He smiled. The priest was right, you know. That day. The old magic knew what it was doing when it rejected that crown. It was waiting for you. Or it was waiting for a 5-year-old with more courage than sense. Same thing. I had courage because you'd shown me what love looks like. What it means to fight for something that matters. He squeezed her hand. Everything I am, everything I've built, it started the day you held me as an infant and decided I was worth loving. Even though I wasn't yours by blood. Even though nobody would have blamed you for keeping a distance. You were always mine, Ilara said softly. From that first moment. My little wolf. And you were always meant to be queen. The pack just needed me to throw a crown in a fire to figure it out. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the next generation grow. Children who would inherit a better world because a 5-year-old had refused to accept injustice. Because an Omega woman had dared to love fearlessly. Because a king had learned to choose family over politics. The sun was setting, painting the garden in gold and amber. Ilara felt the weight of her crown, lighter now after decades of wearing it, but still significant. Still a reminder of responsibility and power, and the impossible journey from invisible Omega to Queen. No regrets? Cashin asked quietly. Not one, Ilara said. Not a single one. Because this was the truth that the old laws had missed, that bloodlines couldn't measure, that pack politics failed to understand. Love was the only thing that mattered. Love fierce enough to commit treason. Love patient enough to change a world. Love strong enough to build families that defied every tradition. A 5-year-old prince had seen it first. Had thrown a crown into sacred fire to protect it. And the old magic had responded, yes. This is what we've been waiting for. Not nobility. Not bloodline. Not political alliance. Just love. Absolute and unconditional and world-changing. The kind of love that made Omega women into queens. The kind of love that made frightened children into revolutionaries. The kind of love that burned brighter than any crown ever could. So tell me, where are you watching this from? What city? Because this story lives in all of us. Every person who's been told they don't belong. Every child who's fought for the family they needed. Every heart that's chosen love over law. Drop your city in the comments. Let me send you that hug. Because you deserve to know you belong. Your love matters. And sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is refuse to accept a world that says otherwise. Just like Cashin. Just like Ilara. Just like the crown that knew better than everyone.